Next speaker is Alison Drin. She will talk about, creating this financing a model for risk transfer. So over to you.
Great, thank you. And with that brief, I will try and be brief. So the nature of this analysis, I'm going to talk first about the risk financing approach. Insurance will be discussed later. So this is really about the general approach that Swiss Re took to this. Michael, my colleague, already discussed our climate risk and disaster assessment, and it was very much informed by discussion with local stakeholders, the input from the experts around looking at what were the key disaster risks and related man-made risks that may or may not be able to be funded for in advance, but anyway should be prepared for. This fed also on the cost-benefit analysis from James Spurgeon. Then we also considered risk transfer recommendations. These are not just insurance related. It's important to note that there's other ways to transfer risk. I think there was guarantees, for instance, mentioned this morning, but to talk about those financing pieces next. This is an overarching summary of the recommendations, and really what it comes down to, the key piece is this holistic risk management approach, that framework really needs to be in place and considered. It would include particularly the identification of who the risk owner is. So that's going to be the party that potentially is able to raise finance and ultimately fund both the risk management program and the post-disaster restoration activities that would be required. The blended financing approach that I'll also delve into a little was very common across all of certainly the 3 sites where I looked in particular at the financing mechanisms. And this involves looking at all available sources of finance, including in particular using tourist fees to advantage, optimizing their collection, looking at government and commercial budgets, and also calling on philanthropy and other innovative products such as debt for nature swaps. The implementation to be staged. So once that risk ownership and potential financing is identified, to really look at building out that risk management program and the governance that needs to sit around that. Building the collaboration between MPAs, between private sector, between the NGOs to ensure that the ongoing resilience of the reef can be supported. Then and only then, once that framework is in place, should consideration really be given to insurance. So it needs that governance, that prioritization, and the common understanding between the parties to work on. The key lesson that you can see called out in the box here was, in particular, it was very easy for local stakeholders, community, government, and NGOs to identify low-hanging fruit. So these were activities that could be readily taken to improve the resilience of the reef. Selena touched on some of them. So things such as improving or educating tourists about the way that they interacted with the reef, looking at controlling illegal fishing, and looking at the way that marine vessels anchored or perhaps didn't anchor on the reef at any time. So setting out the framework, this risk management approach, and this comes back to this question of asset. I'm not going to talk about the valuation of the asset, but it is absolutely key to think about this integrated ecosystem as an asset that has value, and for the parties to have a common understanding of what that asset value is. The little dollar signals there, I think James has outlined some of those, but there'll also be intrinsic value to the local community. For instance, we found some areas, I think, were identified where perhaps it was very difficult to value the inshore fishing that was taking place, but it clearly had value anyway. The risk management approach to look at those hazards, not just the climate and natural disaster ones that we talked about, but some of the devastating effects of the man-made disasters. So we would normally split those into acute events or hazards, which might be sudden onset and might be readily insurable, and chronic. This might be, for instance, very slow and ongoing pollution onto the reef. And those events would generally not be considered insurable, but should still be addressed as part of this risk management framework. So the overall approach then becomes one, first of all, to accept and understand what these risks are, identify the owner, who may or may not ultimately become the policyholder. Avoiding those risks comes down to some of this resilience building activity that Selena talked about, reducing pollution runoff onto the reef where possible, and really making the reef as resilient and healthy in its current state as possible by protecting it. The next phase of the activity is very much about reducing the risk to the reef in preparing for natural hazards by capability building. So this, for instance, includes monitoring activities. It might also include ongoing restoration and other activities filling in current gaps in reef areas where there's identified degradation. Financing needs to be in place to fund all of that. And that was really the key call out that was identified during this. I'm going to come back to the risk transfer, but I think the key point here is events that are, or hazards that are chronic or frequent, ideally would be self-financed within this risk management framework. And it is more the acute, fortuitous, or unpredictable extreme risks that would be suitable for insurance, such as a tropical cyclone or typhoon, depending which hemisphere you're in. So again, this is another way to, I think, present that risk management program. And this is, I think, a common theme across all of the sites that we looked at around identifying who the risk owner is, potentially to be within the conservation trust, for instance, having a responsibility for financing this risk management program, enforcing and protecting the reef as it currently stands, and then looking at building those capabilities to respond to disasters and also working directly on the reef to, for instance, improve areas that are currently degraded. An important point here is also to look at the potential to include within budget basically a build-up or accumulation of funds for emergency disaster preparation for smaller or more frequent events. So this might, for instance, be restoration of areas damaged by boat anchoring. I think in one particular pilot site, Nusa Penida, it was known that every year there is frequent wave action, which does destroy the reef and would benefit from regular restoration after that wave action. It's predictable and it's therefore not insurable, but it's certainly something that building up a fund to do that kind of restoration and putting in place the capability is valuable. And then and only then, looking at integrating the insurance program. This is a very simplified version, a blended version from the different sites of the potential blended financing model. And there's really a few points that I would like to call out here. One is that mix of financing is going to change over time. So I think in particular, it might be some donors who would look to provide seed financing up front, but perhaps don't have appetite or intent to make such financing very long term. The other common element, and I think some of the earlier speakers mentioned it, was there's a lot of potential there to optimize the collection of current tourist levies and visitor fees. So some of these green fees, for instance, may already be well collected, but perhaps there's an open window to direct some of those green fees towards this coral reef resilience and risk management program. There was also, I think James had mentioned it, cases that potentially there's some optimization by improving the process by which some of these fees were going to be collected in order to finance some of these risk management activities. There was also a long list within the reports of potential innovative financing structures, debt for nature swaps, blue carbon, blue bonds, and others could well be utilised as a core part of this blended financing approach. So this is a somewhat detailed slide, but there's a couple of key messages I'd also like to bring out from this. This is simply an illustration and an example. So setting a financing approach, and I think Camille would talk to this more in terms of a conservation trust. It is going to be an iterative process involving all the local stakeholders, looking both at the available budget and the needs of running such a risk management and conservation program for the reef. In all the examples or illustrations, we specifically mentioned that all of these other restoration, conservation, and risk management activities would be in place first before an insurance is put in place. And in particular, one thing to call out is it's important to have that capability to actually use that payout by building up the Reef Brigade capability, having the equipment in place and others, so that it can actually be put to use quite quickly and efficiently after the event. The other key piece here is that the governance and the risk management plan sets out how those claim payouts are going to be used in advance. Not down to the specifics of an individual event, since that's not possible, but a clear understanding within the governance of the risk owner of how the funds should be deployed in all of the foreseeable circumstances. Within what's marked here is, for instance, the operational budget. It would also contemplate, hopefully, the funds available to build up an emergency relief fund to respond to those smaller and more frequent events that are better self-financed than using external risk transfer such as insurance for. Something I'd like to emphasize as well was the outcome from the cost benefit and valuation analysis clearly showed that there really was an economically sensible place, particularly I think for typhoon and tropical cyclone, to get out and do these restoration, recovery immediately post-storm activities with good science supporting the fact that it would improve the speed of the recovery and that having that financing in place would actually be a very effective way to deliver the value for those high priority sections of the reef. So with that, I know I haven't dealt with all of the questions that were raised during the session, but I know there'll be a lot of other discussion this afternoon around the government, the governance, the possible entities, and a comparison of the different entities that were discussed during the different studies as the potential, usually PPP models. But I think it leads very well into the next discussion, because an ideal financing vehicle is a conservation trust vehicle that can bring together all of those counterparties but still have the independence and a well-known and respected mechanism to do such financing. That I